dank-ass burgers, dank-ass pizza, dank-ass french fries, and dank-ass nachos.
Vomit on the host of heaven!
Episode 162 of Radio Free Innsmouth. This week, I thought maybe I'd go back to the show's roots a little bit and cover a more obscure band, because I mean, who doesn't know about like Nightfall or Gorefest? They're pretty well known. This band, however, is a bit more obscure, and I was inspired to cover them by the fact that so many people have been telling me to cover Cruciamentum. Cruciamentum kind of confounds me. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff with that band. Or that band. It's just one fucking guy. His name is like BSOD. I don't even know what that stands for. But that shit is hot right now, even though he started way back in like the early 90s. And he has this massive catalog of just like demo after demo after demo. It almost reminds me of like when I got into Branicald and Ravendark and all the Blazebirth Hall bands, where there was like this whole other world of black metal that I didn't know about. And I'm thinking that the reason I didn't hear about Cruciamentum until, you know, like relatively recently is because he's a bit more from the school of black metal, and a lot of the more obscure bands that I'm into come from the...
He was a decorated veteran of World War I. And he joined the hold the fort. He hated Jews.
I mean, that's not to say that Herr Cruciamentum doesn't also indulge in a little bit of that sort of behavior. He does have 147 offenses on his police record, one for violence, one for incitement of hatred.
I'm gonna say the N-word.
And then the other 145 are all drug-related offenses. He was in jail from winter 2003 to autumn of 2004, winter 2004 to autumn 2005, summer 2006, all the way through 2012, 2014 to mid-2015, and again from mid-to-late 2016 to March 20th, 2019. But he is currently out of jail. He's also an advocate of heroin use. This motherfucker likes to party. Musically, though, it's fucking solid stuff. It's definitely very alienated and raw, but it's melodic. It's pretty complex for what it is. You know, it's got a lot of that really cool synth work, and it made me think of a Norwegian band, or rather a group of Norwegian bands, two of them. Two bands. It made me think of these guys that, unlike Cruciamentum or Branicald or like Volon, any of that Black Twilight stuff, this stuff is probably never going to be like a big phenomenon in the black metal scene. See, those three band families that I just mentioned, they all have like notable personalities associated with them. I mean, you got Eduardo Ramirez from the Black Twilight Circle being all Viva la Raza! Then you got those Russian guys over doing the Blazebirth Hall stuff. They're pretty personality driven because they're all like... Then we got Herr Cruciamentum being all...
Narcotics.
There are no personalities to associate with the bands that we will be covering this week because nobody knows who the fuck these guys were. It was just, I think, two random Norwegian guys did some crazy shit back in the very early 90s. And I'm going to talk about it. Whoever these people were, they had two bands, Cruciamentum and Dies Irae. And Dies Irae is the one that reminded me a lot of Cruciamentum, but Cruciamentum came first, so we're going to start with that band first. Cue it up! So here we have some Norwegian black metal. Is this... Something's wrong here. This is fucking death metal. What the hell is going on?
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
I'm sorry, you got the wrong band. That was a death metal band called Cruciamentum that came out in like the early 2000s, like friggin' 20 years after these poor guys had only put out one fucking demo, so nobody even remembered it. But I remember it. I mean, I wasn't there at the time to listen to it, but I listened to it a decent amount now, and it's pretty good stuff. It's kind of bifurcated down the middle stylistically. About half of it is this very harsh, stormy sort of black metal. Like the very obvious drum machine, I think, actually adds to the like super cold atmosphere this has. This is some of the most alienated sounding stuff, especially coming out of Norway at a very early juncture. This was like 92, 93. And I dig it. It has these like winding tremolo riffs over which they lay some very subtle melodies, and then it transitions into doomier explorations of those same melodies, but in more of like a doom metal kind of context. because it's that same melody from earlier, but now that it's, they backed off the drum machine there, tremolo picking is hard, they can allow those melodies to breathe a little bit. So they like to introduce melodies in a very violent manner and then kind of expound upon them in a more subdued manner. There's also a lot of these really forlorn sounding clean vocals. And this is pretty much contemporaneous with super early Burzum. This is very much ahead of its time for 92, 93. I dig it a lot. Also, this part's really cool right here, this little vocal transition that's about to happen. Going from the clean vocals into harsher stuff. So yeah, no, the black metal parts of this release are great, but nearly as much of the runtime is taken up by these sort of ambient segues, which normally I would hate. I really don't like them on that third Pestilence album or on Acheron and stuff. But here I think they're pretty good because there's a little bit more variety and songwriting to them than just making spooky noises. For instance, this rather psychedelic little bit is actually the intro to that song I was playing earlier. And it kind of presages some of the melodies that would show up in that black metal track, but does them in a more ambient, weirdo context. But it's not all this sort of deceptively calm stuff. You also get into some really disturbing, almost kind of noise collage shit, and it's all just done with guitar effects. This, I like this a lot. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. A lot of people probably won't enjoy this, but I think the way that they tie this kind of really nasty, noisy shit into the black metal is interesting. And it also reminds me a lot of some stuff from the 70s. If you were to go back and listen to some of the weirder, Brian Eno and Robert Fripp shit, like this one right here, Heavenly Music Corporation, this kind of stuff seems like a much lighter version of what Cruciamentum would be doing when they started experimenting with guitar ambience. So they're taking this very weirdo 70s art rock stuff and working it into their nasty black metal. I also think this album probably influenced a lot of the Mithras interlude songs, but that's that's a different topic. And that wouldn't be that unusual for a lot of the Norwegian black metal stuff. Remember, Fenris had his Klaus Schulze tribute project, Neptune Towers. Varg was big into Kraftwerk and Tangerine Dream and all that. It was sort of a reassertion of a very elevated mode of songwriting that happened back in the 70s as people were trying to pull rock away from being pop music, and then eventually it turns into synth pop in the 80s, whatever. Black metal's doing something similar where they're taking that 70s sort of experimental ambient sensibility and working it into metal, pulling it away from its kind of hard rock roots. And Cruciamentum were leading the charge on that. They were doing that kind of ambient weird metal shit back in 1992, 1993, like I said, and later on you can hear other bands. I don't even know if they heard Cruciamentum or if they were just working on a similar wavelength. For instance, the Branecald album Blick av Kald had a heavy usage of this sort of weird ambient material where it's all just layers of clean guitar kind of droning out these melodies that sort of collapse into dissonance and then reassert themselves. And then you get into even newer bands like Midnight Odyssey right here. This reminds me a whole lot of that Cruciamentum stuff. The way they have these very clean, deceptively calm guitar passages that then explode into black metal. This album came out, 2008, 2009, I think? And that's got Cruciamentum's fingerprints all over it. And that guy's enough of a weirdo, he might actually know who the fuck Cruciamentum are. I can't prove that Cruciamentum influenced all these bands that do this kind of stuff, but I will say they are definitely the first band I heard do that kind of thing. And now we get to the other demo level band that Cruciamentum turned into, Dies Irae. Hopefully you got that queued up. So when they turned into a Dies Irae, they got a lot more symphonic and dungeon synth input. Wait a second, this shit ain't right.
Isn't that cute? But it's...
Ow, it's not my fault that these fuckers were so unlucky that they named two bands after death metal bands that wouldn't exist for another 10 years. Jesus. But yeah, that gives me more time to give a bit more of an in-depth intro to the Dies Irae project. So this album is even stranger than Cruciamentum. Dies Irae, speaking of trying to leave rock music conventions behind, every song on this demo has two names. So it'll be Leth or Soul or Fields of Hades, that kind of stuff. But But then next to those, it'll say stuff like molto presto, intermezzo tranquillamente con dolore, attacca cantus con affasione. And you're like, wait a minute, what's going on with this? I'll tell you what's going on there. Those are classical music terms in Italian. Because generally, most old school classical music, names of movements are just denoted by like tempo markings and the emotion that you're supposed to put into it. So these guys took that concept and ran with it. And they also ran with another interesting, very obscure concept from classical music where certain composers will tend to utilize certain musical terms over and over. Like this wasn't Italian, obviously, but the composer Anton Bruckner, most of his symphonies have at least one section that'll say feierlich, nicht schnell, fiery, but not fast. Or else it'll say feierlich misterioso. So that's combining Italian and German, fiery and mysterious. And you don't really see too many composers use that, but he sure used it. Similarly with Dies Irae, you'll always see them using attacca or tranquillamente. So it's either attacking or it's tranquil. And the cool thing about them using these classical music compositional markings is that they actually do sync up with the music. So it's not just a gimmick. Also, speaking of having a really weird perspective on black metal music, these motherfuckers are so strange that Dies Irae, the band name, doesn't even have a logo. It's just, fucking Times New Roman or whatever. And then Circle of Leth, the name of the demo, is the turn of phrase that got the black metal logo treatment on the cover of the demo. I've never seen anybody else do that. You just have like a normal ass, here's the band name, here's the name of the album, and the name of the album is all like, what? It's just all fucking crazy with the squigglies and shit.
Isn't that weird?
I don't know. But we can use the title track of the album, just Leth, to show how those compositional markers actually do sync up with what the music is doing. Because it starts off molto presto, and yeah, that's fucking molto presto if I've ever heard it. Molto presto just means very fast, and it's fast. It's nasty. The drum machine is back. The vocals aren't that good, sorry guy, but the music is great. And it's really complicated. The guitar is almost more of a noise instrument at this point, just better for texture, and everything is being led around by the piano and these like synth lines. So really cool molto presto type stuff. Also, make sure you remember that melody. And then we get into intermezzo tranquillamente con dolore, which would of course mean tranquil interlude with much sadness. And yeah, it's definitely got that. They deconstructed that piano melody from the beginning of the song down to its bare essentials as we hit single keys, and then it goes into this very outer space, like Klaus Schulze-esque exploration for our little intermezzo with a lot of like synth flute. Remember earlier I was talking about dungeon synth? If you don't know what that is, it's this, and then also like that intro to the show, that was dungeon synth. It's weird keyboard music played by black metal people, essentially. Like they use specifically artificial sounding tones, and that's trying to do a Dimmu Borgir thing where they make it sound like an orchestra. The fact that it sounds so weird and obviously synthetic is part of the music. But the third part of the song, after our molto presto and our tranquil interlude, is attacca cantus con affasione, which of course would be attack song with affection. So they're utilizing emotions not normally seen in a black metal context to make some very interesting and unique music. Of course, you gotta have organs. It's still a black metal album, for fuck's sakes. But yeah, we are moving out of our tranquil interlude into the attacca, and it's gonna hit you like a truck. There it is. That melody from earlier has kind of been combined with that new organ melody. And then we lead out of the song on some very Gorgoroth-esque tremolo riffs. So that's Dies Irae in a nutshell, and you could see why I might compare this to Grausamkeit, because it's super alienated and raw and nasty sounding, not meant for the ears of the neurotypicals, but it's also, very synth heavy and quite a bit more complex than it would initially appear to the untrained ear. Those weird outside of metal influences that were somewhat prominent on the Cruciamentum demo are definitely back on this Dies Irae demo. For instance, the song Fields of Hades has a potent medieval music influence. And it's not just for show, like this is very similar to a lot of medieval and Renaissance era music, right down to how they're utilizing that drum. If people want to know what a dungeon synth is, this is a pretty darn good example of it. Don't worry everyone, it's still a fucking black metal album, as evidenced by the following transition. where they combine that black metal with the medieval music there in a very interesting manner, definitely ahead of its time. You remember earlier we were talking about all that weird like 70s and 80s shit that influenced this band? Well, if we rewind this one a bit.
안 골라 이건. 포기, 패스.
Come on, you gotta rewind it faster than that. We're already running long on this fucking episode.
아, 이거는 못 고르지.
Alright, here we go. Back into time. Back to the early 70s. When you had Brian Eno again on the Another Green World album doing some similar sort of like guitar drone heavy tribal drumming type shit. Given that there was some pretty clear Eno influence on Cruciamentum, I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that it also shows up in Dies Irae, but also, more importantly, Dead Can Dance, that 80s goth band, pretty much the patron saints of what would later on become Dungeon Synth. That shit was all over this Dies Irae demo. We should probably do like a Dead Can Dance episode. But yeah, this is like the mid-80s, and they were working in a similar vein to Dies Irae. Obviously, they weren't playing black metal, but they were trying to pull music back to an earlier time with a slightly more complex songwriting. So yeah, that's a Dies Irae and Cruciamentum, those two projects, bringing in a lot of weird stuff.
I'm hearing a lot of strange stuff
from the 70s and the 80s and the 17 and 1800s into black metal. One of the first bands to do it. Don't know how influential they are, just given how obscure it is, but you can look both those demos up on YouTube. They're actually available in pretty good quality now compared to the old shitty tape rips I had.
Oh, fuck that bitch!
Hope you liked it. If this episode goes over well, maybe someday we'll do an actual proper Dungeon Synth episode. I'll see you next week.
This sexy goth stud's just about done making this YouTube video. My primary focus on my channel is pizzas and burgers.